Okay, it is 3 o'clock, so we will get started on our next session for this afternoon. So I'm really pleased to welcome Jane, Nick and Karen from King's College London, and they're going to make you do stuff. So this is going to be a really nice next hour where we're going to get a little bit more interactive. So please welcome Jane, Nick and Karen.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so the three of us are here today to have a little look at ways of extending the impact of library teaching interventions through reflective practice. Jane and Nick are both learning and teaching librarians at King's. I was until recently, and I'm now a clinical support librarian, still working at King's College London, but with particularly NHS staff who we support as well. And a sort of notable person who's missing from today, mostly because she's headed off to speak at another conference, is our colleague Mia O'Hara, with whom I presented a sort of smaller, shorter version of this session at Lilac recently. And so what we're going to do today is give you hopefully some chances to interact in the first half hour or so, but we're going to give you some examples of where we've used reflection in practice, a little bit of why we started thinking about this, and then the second half of our session is going to be around you guys having a real chance to think about putting reflection into any sort of teaching practice that you are doing. Okay, so just in terms of when you teach, or you might teach, what we'd like to do today is to take a really broad view of that, a really broad scope of library teaching. So we're thinking of perhaps when you might be doing one-to-ones with library users, when you might be running workshops in or outside of the library, doing drop-ins, answering queries, training colleagues, presenting at a conference, anywhere where you're sharing knowledge, sharing information, just simply chatting to somebody about someone who is perhaps using your service. So we get a lot of this even from within, I think, our own institution around, oh, I'm not a teacher. But that's what we're trying to look at today, is this really broad scope of what teaching is. And so hopefully everybody who hears today will feel included and able to consider their teaching in some way. Okay. So the reason that we put together this had started to have these discussions and came to the conclusion that we wanted to share ideas on reflection was an article that Mia and I were discussing, which was published in 2021. It was a guest editorial, and it was entitled The Contested One-Shot, Deconstructing Power Structures to Imagine New Futures. And the author of this, Pogowski, she basically wrote this guest editorial to very much look and raise questions around imbalances between librarians and professors, consider the role of systemic racism and sexism in the academy, and the danger of teaching surface level skills only. And this quote on the screen, I think it went to the heart of some of the things that we were perhaps thinking about the impact of our teaching. A one-shot in this context was deemed to be kind of a one-off teaching intervention, probably with very little or no connection with what students in a university context were being taught in part of their modules. As you can see, a quote that it has no memory of where information literacy has been, no vision of where it's going, and it is ephemeral within cycles of ineffectiveness. And I think this was something that really made us reflect on what our teaching was doing and what impact we perhaps wanted it to have. And so I'd like to ask you a question now. I'd like you to consider what you think the limitations are of library teaching. as we said, that can have a very broad scope. So don't just think of it being in a university context or in a classroom. Have a think about what the limitations are of library teaching. And I'd like you to pop those answers into this poll everywhere that we have here. So I'll just make that QR code a little bit bigger. So you can do this on your mobile, on a computer, I think it's going to create a bit of a word cloud for us. So if you've got more than one word, you might want to just hyphenate that. And let's see whether we get any responses coming into this. So the limitations of library teaching. And I didn't restrict you to a particular number of responses because I thought people might have lots of thoughts. Okay. Yeah. So if they're out of context, what's their authority, how much engagement, perhaps academics, how are you dealing with those? What's your relationship with them? The time that librarians have, I can see disconnected there. And I've got lack coming up as a big word on its own, and I'm wondering whether that was linked with lack of authority. Yeah. Lack of engagement, perhaps. How are they relevant? How are they relatable? How do you follow up on them? Brilliant. Okay. I think some thoughts here as well around perhaps when they could be more useful. So we've got embedded being shown there. Perhaps links to the curriculum. How are they assessed? What are the links to the assessment? Are you embedded within that kind of thing? But I think even taking that outside of an academic context where you're sort of solely teaching students, perhaps, what's the purpose? What are your resources? What is the relevance? How much can that information that is taught in that session, in that one-to-one, in that moment that you have with someone at the desk or with a colleague, how much can that be retained, that information that you're passing on? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I've got some thoughts there. I'm going to come back to these afterwards as well, because I think that would be quite interesting to kind of see. Okay. Now, one of the things that we did have, and which I think I'm hoping you have had some positive feedback on any of the teaching that you have done as well, is that we did get positive feedback that were coming in from the various teaching that we were doing. This quote is a recent one that we've had back on a session that was embedded into a particular cohort of NHS students. They had a kind of one-shot finding information and critical appraisal session, but it was after discussion with the module leader. It was embedded within their timetable, and they gave very positive feedback and interestingly linked it to an essay pass rate. Now, we weren't particularly teaching towards that assessment. It was just some of the skills that were needed was finding evidence and appraising the evidence. But they linked that, the feedback that we got linked that in. And I think obviously what that comes back to is this idea that not all one-shot teaching sessions are the same. To be successful, if you are sort of having to do one shots, if you don't have a choice apart from that kind of like just one go at teaching, they do need to be contextualized. You would hope that they were linked to a particular research need or a particular assessment, and contextualized within a particular class if that is appropriate, as in a teaching class, a teaching module. And so we sort of moved on from this to thinking about some of the ways that we could hopefully make our own teaching more impactful, more relevant, thought about the conversations that we have with people who are perhaps booking those sessions with us, or when we're undertaking a teaching intervention of whatever description that is, ways that we could help the learner to perhaps retain and have that knowledge more. And so we focused in this particular instance on reflection, on encouraging learner reflection. I'm just going to hand over to Nick.
Cool. Thanks, Karen. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So yeah, as Karen was saying, we thinking about those limitations that you've so nicely identified in that word cloud: time, disconnection, engagement. We really thought that promoting reflection in our learners would be a really significant way to empower them, to help them make links between new knowledge they've acquired and knowledge they previously had, and then to take that knowledge into the future and develop it beyond the scope of our single one-shot sessions. And what we mean by reflection, we kind of pulled from this piece of work by Tazak and Robertson, and they have posited 4 stances of reflection, 4 different ways of reflecting, because there's many different ways that we can do it, but Tazak and Robertson have picked out these 4 key ways. The first one is about looking backward to recall previous knowledge that you've gained and then activate it. The second one is about looking forward to think about how you can use that knowledge in a new context, applying it to your own research, your own learning in future. That's translating. And the third one is about looking inward, reflecting, reviewing the current situation. And they term that self-regulation, self-regulating. Finally, the 4th stance of reflection is about looking outward to connect your identity, your learning to a larger context. And that's all about engagement, engaging. Next slide, please, Karen. Now, at this point, we were going to do a poll to ask you which of those stances you can see in these 3 scenarios you've got here. But unfortunately, because Zoom, believe it or not, is a bit new to us at King's, we primarily use Teams. It hasn't really worked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make a crude approximation and put something in the chat. And hopefully we can do it that way. So in the chat, I am going to put in those 4 stances. There you go. And if we just take this first scenario, imagine that you are giving a presentation at a conference on the campaign for fairer ebook prices for libraries. In that scenario, do you think you would be demonstrating A, B, C, or D? Maybe more than one. What do you think? Please pop your thoughts in the chat. Are you looking backward, recalling previous knowledge? Are you looking forward, inward, outward? We've got C and D coming in strong, inward and outward. Yeah. Any love for A or B? We've got some A's there. B and a D. Fantastic. Yeah, I think this one definitely, you are looking outward, you're engaging with colleagues, peers in a conference, trying to connect your learning to their context. You're also looking inward, you thinking about their context when you're presenting, what they're interested in, how you can make it interesting to them. And there's quite a few people have put in, yeah, A, you're also looking backward. Isn't it all of them, Siobhan says? Yeah, absolutely. And you can say all 4. And you'll see that as a common theme as we go through these scenarios. So for the second one, Imagine you're writing your PDR, if you have one, you know, one of those like annual kind of personal development reviews, and you're thinking about what you've achieved over the last year and in your work and how you want to take that forward into the next year. Again, which of the stances would you be demonstrating there? B and C from Darren. Yeah. Yeah. I think you guys have got it. I think what we're trying to say here is that reflection occurs, or the opportunity to reflect occurs in almost everything, any kind of teaching practice that we do. So going back to what Karen said about taking teaching as a very broad concept, you're training a new colleague, you're thinking of your PDR, you're presenting, that absolutely requires reflection. And by understanding that reflection and really thinking how you can make the most of it, you can improve the way that you teach, and you can improve the way your learners and pick up on what you're trying to teach. So fantastic. Thanks for your responses there. Apologies that we didn't have a really fancy poll in the chat. Next slide, please, Karen.
Brilliant, and I think I've unmuted again as well. So just winning here now after the poll problem. So what we're going to do now is just try and give you some examples of some times in our various teaching, and that might be face-to-face, it might be online workshops, it might be in online courses, and in other areas that we've sort of been able to embed this, where we have identified that we are trying to give learners a space for reflection. So we've also tried to give you some examples of where we've used different tools to do that. And so these two examples are using Poole Everywhere. The top one, share one tip for finding research that works for you. Now that one was a question which sort of aimed to encourage learners to reflect on what they already knew, to share a tip with fellow learners. It was an experienced group, and this actually took place right at the beginning of the workshop, before the librarians had even sort of started talking about ways to find research. This was to surface that kind of knowledge, to activate that, the prior knowledge and practice that they were already doing, and to sort of try and build that bit of community with the learners in the room, so that they could already share on and reflect on what they were doing already. The bottom example was a Poole Everywhere that I ran it was a two-parter workshop. They'd had a first session, a group of students, health students, looking at a medical database, and it was this one was to perhaps get them to really reflect on that knowledge that they had in that previous session, and to try and make sure that they were able to sort of put that into practice. I think a whole sort of 4 days had gone by between the two sessions, so it was about sort of trying to make sure that it hadn't gone completely from their minds. Now the activities here are obviously useful as well for the teacher. There it means that we're able to assess what learners have understood, what learners have remembered, what learners know already. But fundamentally, for this aspect, it's also about encouraging those learners to really reflect on any prior knowledge that they might have, to put them into that kind of learning space, so that they're ready then to connect new knowledge that's coming in with what they already know. Okay. So we also use Padlet at King's. We have these in a number of our sessions and our teaching. And one of the things that we have at King's is a sort of suite of e-learning, which in some cases learners are asked or a timetable to do ahead of coming to one of our sessions. So this was a fourth year pharmacy group of students. They'd been given some time to do some e-learning around finding information using databases. databases and putting a research question and kind of like having a look at the different concepts that particular question was made up from. And they're asked 2 questions to start with. What did you learn and what do you need to know more about? Sometimes they fill this in ahead of a session or during the session itself. These particular students were therefore sort of had done that little bit of reflecting. They were then asked in the session to put down what their project title was, so that gives us a bit of information about their sort of topic area, gets them thinking about what it is that they might need to know for that particular project. But then during the session, there's also a space on the Padlet for them to ask any questions that they may have. Now, this particular workshop ran as both an online and an in-person one, and I think what it just gives in both of those settings is actually a way for students to ask something anonymously. So if they're not comfortable putting up their hand in the computer room, or they're online on Teams, but still don't want to ask that question, have it associated with their name, the fact that they could ask it on the Padlet and get a response in real time has proved quite useful. And so they're engaging with what they're learning, what's being delivered to them in that session, and they're able to ask instant questions if they've got any particular if they suddenly realize that they haven't got the hang of something, what do they still need to know about? That's at the beginning of the session, but then during the session, what is it that they're still struggling with? And we try and revisit the Padlet at the end of the session as well, just to make sure that we have answered everything and to kind of summarize any or sort of questions that have become quite a bit of a theme. Sort of lots of people have been asking the same thing. The response that we get to this, we've had some feedback on this. The teachers are really actively answering every single question. That's really helpful. And it remains accessible to the students after the workshop as well, so that they can come back and revisit that as they want.
Okay. The next little tool that we've used to promote reflection is a forum. And to give you a bit of context, at King's we run a 6-week asynchronous online course that's developed for students that are undertaking systematic reviews. And that's what the screenshot is taken from. And for this particular assignment, the learners on this online course were asked to use their existing knowledge to identify a suitable limit or filter that was appropriate for their specific research question, and then post it on a forum that we host on our kind of Moodle-based VLE at King's. And then they have to look at another participant's forum post and provide feedback on it. So this really allows them to, looking back towards those 4 stances of reflection, to engage with other learners and to apply their existing knowledge to their own context and their own research. And just like the Padlet, we get feedback that learners really enjoy, having the time and the space on a forum to put their thoughts down and then to kind of discuss things with their peers in that environment. So it's a really useful tool to start to develop that aspect, those aspects of reflection. Can we have the next slide, please, Karen? The next 2 things are all about helping our learners self-regulate and pick out the next steps for their learning, what to do with the things that we've taught them. This screenshot is pulled from one of our feedback forms. And we adapt our feedback forms from Stephen Brookfield's critical incident questionnaires, which might be familiar to some of you. But basically, it's a questionnaire that we send out after our one-to-one appointments. So we offer one-to-one appointments to our student members and our NHS members, where they can sit down with a senior library assistant and discuss any problems that they're having searching for literature. And after the one-to-one appointment, we send them this questionnaire, and this question asks them to reflect on the things that they were taught in the one-to-one and ask on what they're going to do with it, essentially. Are they going to put time aside to practice it? Do they need to book another follow-up appointment? Are they going to check out the e-learning? So it's just a way to get the learners to think back on what they've learned and then think about what they can do with it, what they might need to do to develop that knowledge. If there's anything else they need to know, to come back to us so we can help them further. And the next slide, please, Karen. This is very similar. This is a reflection tool that we put together with our colleagues in the widening participation team at King's. So they put on sessions for prospective students that are thinking of coming to King's. And we put on one of these sessions to talk about the academic skills, the information literacy skills that are needed when you move into higher education from further education. And we gave each of the participants in those sessions one of these reflective tools. It was just a printout, basically asking them what's helped them already, what's helped them develop their understanding and their skills in researching for information in the past, but then also looking ahead to the future, but what they can do to develop that existing knowledge. What do they need to learn? What do they want to learn? What do they need help with? Something for them to keep and to almost have as a kind of a journal, a log for them to map their journey in developing those skills. So yeah, those are some tools that we've put into practice. Next slide, and I'll hand over.
Thanks, Nick. So we're going to do something a bit active now, and we're going to get you to reflect on reflective teaching, because that felt very appropriate to make sure you got the chance to experience lots of different reflective activities. So what we're going to do is we're going to do sort of a variation on a think, pair, share activity. Now, some of you may be familiar with think, pair, share as a method of active learning, and we've kind of repurposed it as part of introducing kind of reflection within teaching sessions. So the first part of a think, pair, share is always the think, and this is a chance for individual learners to have a bit of time and space on their own to gather their thoughts, to consider a question. We then pair people together or use small groups, which is what we're going to do today, because it's quite a large session today. And there's a sort of discussion, and people talk about their ideas and their answers to those questions. And then you come back together almost in like a sort of almost kind of a plenary session where you share what you all found and if there are any common themes. So we're going to do that. We're going to start with the think, and while you're thinking, I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. We've already mentioned that Zoom is not our usual online teaching tool, so this may take slightly longer than normal. But what I would like you to do is for the next 2 minutes is to think about these two questions. How do you already embed reflection in your teaching interventions, and how can you further embed reflection in your interventions? So according to the model we were talking about earlier, you're looking backwards and then you're looking forwards. Again, just to reiterate that we are thinking here about lots of different types of teaching interventions that could be sharing, that could be presentations, could be handling reference inquiries, training colleagues, all can be considered teaching for the purposes of this session, because we're aware that not everybody is as lucky as we are to spend all our time teaching. So yeah, 2 minutes to think about those two questions on your own, get your thoughts together, and then we'll pop you into the breakout rooms. Okay, so you've had your 2 minutes. So I'm going to press the open all rooms button and really, really hope that this works. What we'll do is we'll give you 15 minutes to have those discussions, because it is a very big, oh no, let's say, actually looking at the time, let's say 10 minutes. We'll give you 10 minutes because you have got quite large groups. You're going to have about 2 minutes each to talk about your ideas. And we would also like you to record your answers on a Padlet. So I'm just going to share that in the chat. So if everybody could just follow the link that's in the chat to the Padlet, and we'll set you up in your breakout rooms. And actually, no, I've changed my mind. I will give you 15 minutes in the breakout rooms, because I'm really interested in what you've all got to say to each other. So we'll come back together at 3:45. Okay, so hopefully everybody has got the link to that Padlet now and clicked on it. I'm going to open the rooms and we'll see you all back here in 15 minutes.
Are you guys seeing the Padlet now?
Yes, thank you. That's
cool. Okay.
It didn't assign Darren because I said don't assign. I hope that you found that an interesting experience, and it does show you what you can do both online and also with a large group. The beauty of the think, pair, share as well is it is something that you can do in if you're in the situation where maybe you have 300 students in a lecture theatre. You know, there are kind of ways you can adapt that activity to work in those kinds of spaces. So think, pair, share is definitely something that's worth thinking about and adapting to try to get students to start reflecting on what they're learning, what they already know, and what they're going to do in the future. So I'm seeing some wonderful, some really great reflections on the Padlet. So we've got, we've only got about 5 minutes to go through them all. So I do apologise if I don't read out your comment, but it is just, there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. And I really like this one actually, about building feedback and reflection into a session instead of using a Google form afterwards. I'm assuming that the Google form maybe has maybe asks some of these questions, but as we know that's sometimes not always the best way to get responses and sort of deep thinking. So yeah, building it into the session is a really good idea for the future. And interactivity, yeah, I mean, a lot of reflection goes hand in hand with active learning techniques and engagement and discussion. A lot of these things do go hand in hand, but again, you can mix it up and you can create active activities that are just for one person to do on their own, or in groups, or as a class as well. So it's very flexible, and when we're teaching, we sort of want to mix all of those things up. But the more interactivity we can get into a session, the more likely it is that students will engage, and the more likely it is that sort of deep and meaningful learning will take place, rather than that sort of superficial learning. There's a really good question here about, is whether the end of the session is too soon for students to know what they will find useful. Yeah, I think that there is a bit of a problem there. It could be too soon for some students. I think for some it will be fine. They will know, they will have a clear sense of that. I think the problem is that at the end of the session, that's when you've got them, you know, and if you send anything as a follow-up, you know, there's issues around, are they actually going to engage with that? So it's kind of trying to capture that while we've got them. And again, that speaks back to where we started in this presentation by thinking about Nicole Bukowski's quote around you know, the one shot being maybe not the ideal way we'd want to teach because of the limitations of not being able to go backwards and forwards to the students. And as Karen says, a minute paper could be really useful at the end, which is just gives them a short, sharp, quick reflection, but gets them to focus. We do actually have some reflective surveys that we send out to our NHS staff a few weeks after their teaching session, which is all around impact, and it kind of asks some questions around you know, how have they used the knowledge, how are they going to use the knowledge, and that's something we do because it's what the NHS wants, you know, kind of wants us to do, but it's actually really good practice. It's easier to get NHS staff to complete that though, because it's part of their receiving a certificate for their CPD hours, so there's a little bit more carrot in that one. And then there's an interesting point in the how do you already embed reflection in your interventions, that the looking backwards bit, reflecting backwards, about someone saying we haven't necessarily included reflection consciously, but felt we do it. And yeah, so it's through polls, module teams, embed this, asking students to consider whether they're getting the information they need or if there's more they need. Yep, that's definitely reflection. That's particularly making them look to the future and saying, have you got everything you need for the future? The issue around sometimes classroom discussions, even online, being dominated by certain voices is always a challenge, whatever you're trying to do in teaching. And then, yes, some tools are great tools, but you can't use them for accessibility reasons, which is something that I find I get quite frustrated about. And making it relatable to daily life, using sort of icebreakers, presenting everyday items and asking students to use the Padlet to note what words they would use to describe this item. Okay, so I'm guessing that's to generate sort of sex, sort of search terms, I'm imagining, which is really, really interesting. I like that. And then there's some suggestions about polls, like using Menti, Vivox and Padlet. So was there anything, we've got a couple of minutes before we move on to the last activity. I'm just wondering if maybe there were any questions that you have that you haven't popped in the chat, that you have questions about this approach or about the things we've done. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you, Karen. So our final activity now to sort of wrap up and close, and I can see that some of you eager beavers have actually done this already, but there is a third question on the Padlet, which is what's one thing you're going to take away from today. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to answer that. So a couple of minutes, we'll come sort of back together at 5 to 4. But if you could just think about what's the one thing you're going to take away from today? What's the one thing that you're going to think more about, or something that you're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. I know how I'm going to do it. I've got a really clear idea. Or it could be just something that you think, I need to reflect on this. I need to think about it. I need to think about where I already do it. I need to think about where I can do it. This is a slightly strange situation where we're getting you to reflect on reflection. But hopefully by doing this, you can see how that process works. So yeah, if you could just go back onto the Padlet, I think you've probably all still got it open. But if you haven't, I've just popped it in the chat again. Yes, Mia, that was what I was thinking. It was slightly meta. Making my head hurt a little bit. And then it's worth just remembering that we do have a fourth column on this Padlet, which is a space to share resources on reflection. I think we'd be open to any of you who've got any good resources to share as well. That would be lovely. And yes, there's that lovely chapter by Stephen Brookfield there about reflective practice for ourselves as teachers and practitioners using the 4 lenses, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's very, very good. And it covers some of the things that you've been talking about in the other sections of the Padlet as well. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so final slide, please, Karen. I shouldn't say final slide because there is a bibliography as well. So if you're interested in any of the resources that we've been talking about, there is a bibliography as part of the slides. So you should be able to find any of it. These are our contact details. And I should just say many thanks to our colleague Mia O'Hara, who has swung in for the last part of the session for her work on the presentation and on the version that went to Lilac as well. We are all more than happy for you to contact us with any questions or ideas or to have a chat. We all love talking about teaching and learning, so we do welcome any kind of correspondence or feedback. We would absolutely love to hear if you've implemented any of the things we've suggested today, or if you've changed your practice because of it. Do please let us know. We'll be absolutely thrilled to hear that it's had an impact on your work. So I think that just leaves it to me to say thank you very much for coming along. It's been a really enjoyable session. I hope that you've got something out of it, and it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me as well. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Somewhat like the third Ronnie. Goodbye from me as well.
I feel like we should have an exit theme song there for you, like. Bye.
Do a little dance.
Yes, feel free.
Sort of a cane and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that was brilliant. So thank you so much, Jane, Nick and Karen. There's lots of thank yous coming through in the chat, but yeah, if you'd like to express your thanks to our presenters, that was a really great session. Thank you so much. What we will do now is take a break until 4:15. And then we will have our final session of the day. So yeah, please do take the break, get some water, get outside, get some sunshine, and we will see you in about 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you so much, Darren.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was really great. It was nice to have an interactive session, I think, as we've had a lot of talky sessions, which are also good, but yeah, nice to have something a bit different. So
it's nice to mix it up, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's nice to have the time to do it as well, to not feel too rushed and feel like we could give people the space to to have those conversations.
Yeah. Do it properly.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to go and have a break, so I shall see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye.